Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where, huzzah, moviegoing, it seems, is not dead. I know some of you were so excited to dance on its grave. It ain't over, but this is a very encouraging sign. And even with the shock of returning to communal moviegoing, that's right, audiences returned to tasers and bare feet this weekend, and I got a couple additional nightmare stories from some of you as well in my DMs. If you have a nightmare story or a very good story, please share it down below about returning to the multiplex. Because yes, it seems that movie theaters haven't upped their game at all, despite flirting with extinction. But hey, this weekend they went back to being the only game in town, as Paramount rolled the dice by making A Quiet Place 2 theaters only for 45 days until heading to Paramount Plus, and they hit the jackpot. 48.3 for the 3-day and a stunning 58.5 for the 4-day, blowing Godzilla vs. Kong out of the water as the biggest opening of the pandemic to date. Now, Godzilla vs. Kong isn't a total comp. It's not the exact same situation. Godzilla vs. Kong hit theaters and HBO Max, it's important to point out, for also a holiday weekend, Easter weekend, but it did open on a Wednesday. So again, as I said, not an exact comp. But bottom line, in its first 4 days, it brought in 40.9. And Cruella itself, also available digitally on Disney Plus in this case, opened at 21.3 for the 3-day and 26.5 for the 4-day. Does Chapek now maybe regret the decision to do a digital day and date release? Should he have had the guts that Paramount did? Hard to say, because he clearly left money on the table box office-wise, considering how well A Quiet Place did, and that family movies have actually turned out to be one of the few bright spots at the box office during the pandemic. But again, at $30 a pop on Disney Plus, he gets all that green instead of having to share some of the gross with exhibitors as he does with the theatrical release. However, if you head over to Disney Plus and you check out their trending section, who knows what it says on yours? That thing's very inconsistent, which is why I don't cover it when I talk about streaming every week. But my app shows it at number 5. So how many Premier Access purchases does that make for? Clearly a decent number of people did opt to see it in theaters. Audiences have also been unusually harsh on Cruella. Like, wow, people have been shockingly mean to that movie all week. And one thing I've noticed during the pandemic is that if you allow people to watch big new movies at home, a lot of people watch who normally wouldn't pay to see that movie in theaters. But they decide if I can watch it digitally, maybe some of them are pirating them, so they're watching them for free. I see they get bored and they hate tweet. Or maybe a couple of people start hate tweeting and see other people seeing they're getting clicks and they're getting likes for it, so they jump on the bandwagon. It's very bad. I also think people appreciate the experience less when they watch something at home or on the go than when it's an event, when they actually have the experience of going to the theater. Further evidence of this, the fact that a lot of these movies have pretty darn high, and in some cases legit high, cinema scores, which are rankings from audiences who come out of the theater opening weekend. So what do these big numbers mean? Well, first off, they're absolutely fantastic news for Emily Blunt and Emma Stone. Oh boy, just the other day I was wondering, with interest in Jungle Cruise pretty much non-existent, if Emily Blunt was the female Ryan Gosling, as in beloved by some, but nobody will actually pay to see her. It seems, though, that in the right role, I wouldn't call her a star just yet, because the first Quiet Place did well, but, she couldn't really deliver on Mary Poppins. Although Mary Poppins is kind of in the same ballpark, but for that kind of movie, it should have done better. Mary Poppins should have done better. First Mary Poppins is one of the most successful movies of all time. But anyway, in the right role, I think it's shown that Emily Blunt can sell tickets, and Paramount is surely quite pleased that they've locked in her husband and creative partner, John Krasinski, with that first look deal that they just signed that we talked about a few weeks ago, and that Quiet Place 3 is on the way. In fact, John Krasinski, who's still producing, revealed that Jeff Nichols, the writer-director of Mud and Midnight Special, who he's handing the reins over to, Krasinski said he just turned in a script. Nichols did. Blunt should also get a plum new acting gig off of this in the next few weeks. Fantastic Four? Not likely with John Krasinski's new Paramount deal. He's a Paramount guy. And also, I heard, as I told you before, that for Fantastic Four casting, Feige wants to go younger and cheaper. Krasinski and Blunt would be expensive. And also, they wouldn't have maybe the longevity that a franchise would be looking for going forward. I think that is not legit. I think that John Krasinski and Emily Blunt would be fantastic. I don't want I don't like de-aging these characters. I mean, look at Robert Downey Jr. Was, in the second half, it was the second win to his whole career when he was Iron Man. And so I really would love to see John Krasinski and Emily Blunt in these roles. And I know, again, I would hope that Kevin Feige would change his mind, and instead of going for a cheaper award winner like Brie Larson, like he did for Captain Marvel, who should have been Charlize Theron, maybe he won't make that mistake again, and he'll cast John Krasinski and Emily Blunt. I wouldn't hold my breath, though. As for Emma Stone, her upcoming slate is a little light because she just had a baby, but if she has some good projects still on the way. But if her team is also doing their job correctly, she should get a very big movie deal in the next few weeks as well. Will we get a Cruella 2 announcement? The box office looks a little soft to me for a sequel, but let's see how it does in the weeks ahead. Now, is the pandemic box office era over? Are we done? Did Disney make a mistake committing to digital day and date through Jungle Cruise? And Warner Brothers through the end of the year? It was recently, I think it was Variety that stated that Warner Brothers is likely, unless there's a huge jump in subscribership for HBO Max, that they probably will lose $1 billion over the decision to put their entire 2021 slate on HBO Max, same day, day and date for no extra cost. They said the lost box office revenue and all the deals they had to cut to make up for the lost bonuses are really going to be $1 billion loss. Oh, you can see one of the reasons that AT&T also maybe was eager to get rid of that. They're like, it's another one. And Kevin Feige has got to feel he should have stuck to his guns with theaters only for Black Widow. But not so fast. Again, let's see second weekend numbers for these movies, what they look like. Especially A Quiet Place 2, which is, again, theaters only for 45 days and therefore a true test. The first A Quiet Place 2 opened pretty much about the same and dropped just 34% in its second weekend. So let's see how A Quiet Place 2 does. It might have been A Quiet Place 2 might have benefited from timing, being the first pandemic, first really strong movie out with numbers dropping, with all these announcements that people can go out, and a holiday weekend. It might have been a perfect storm. So let's see how it does second weekend. For me, I want to see what happens with The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard and F9 when those movies open, because they're both theaters only. They have a broader demographic appeal, surprisingly narrow on the appeal for A Quiet Place 2 and Cruella, and they both still did great. But they don't cast as wide a net as these other upcoming movies. Even something like Snake Eyes, I think, is going to cast a wider net. Also, let's see what happens when social distancing lets up a bit, because these theaters are still not able to run at full capacity. Because while these, A Quiet Place 2 has posted a hallelujah number, considering how the pandemic has been, big Memorial Day weekend movies usually open north of 100 million. But, movie theaters are basically at 50% capacity, so it looks like maybe 100 million could be possible. Oh, that Black Widow decision has got to hurt. Mask mandates are also being dropped by the big theater chains where the states will allow it. And we'll see if that has a positive or negative effect on moviegoing. Some people might be like, oh boy. And some people might also be like, well, I was just going to go back, but now you've scared me again. And of course, let's see if there's a coronavirus spike in 2 weeks. I think this is an excellent real-world test for those of us who are a little bit more nervous. So we'll see what happens in 2 weeks. And if there isn't a spike, moviegoing is really going to come roaring back. Like, wow. I get nervous. They'll be like, we don't need social distancing then. But you're like, but it's working, and so you should maybe keep it. Let's see. I mean, they had A Quiet Place 2 playing like every half hour in a lot of theaters. They have, because there's not as much content out as usual, they have the screens to flood the market and still run at less capacity, I think. So maybe that makes up for it a little bit. And then Black Widow, as I said, will be another fascinating test about the ongoing viability of day-and-date digital releases, which I know some of you want to keep. I don't think it's going to happen. I suspect a lot of articles will be written about how much money Black Widow left on the table. Let's see. All right, well, I think more people will go to theaters, though, to see it. And the $30 price point is very high. So let's see what happens with Black Widow. Although I think even for myself, I would be much more willing to see it in theaters if there isn't a spike in 2 weeks. Now let's see how streaming is doing, right? Which, by the way, fascinatingly chose not to counter-program this weekend. They just gave it to the movies. They were like, Hollywood's had a tough time. The traditional the traditional film has had a difficult time. Let's just give them Memorial Day weekend. Netflix took their boot off the neck of movie making. But first, before we talk about streaming this week, I want to go back in time, because that's how Nielsen is. They're weeks behind, to the week of April 26th, where Shadow and Bone in its second week got to number 1. Where is that season 2 announcement? I think it's ridiculous they haven't announced a season 2 yet for that show. Falcon and Winter Soldier, 1 week after wrapping, is still going strong as people binge. And on that note, Invincible. Here it is, in its final week, is back up into the top 10. It was at number 10, I think, in its second week, right? But now in its final episode, when everyone could binge it, and also it wasn't going up against Falcon and Winter Soldier this week, a new episode, it got to number 8. I think that's wonderful. Let's see if it's in the top 10 next week. And I believe that season 2, now that everyone has discovered it, I think season 2 will perform even better. And hopefully it won't. I mean, I don't know. I think the streaming schedule is going to get awfully crowded, so it'll probably have to go up against somebody, especially because it's a week-to-week release instead of just, one fell swoop like Netflix does. But I think just like Amazon's other superhero hit from Seth Rogen, The Boys, just blew up in its season 2, I predict Invincible season 2 will blow up as well. Over in movies, speaking of Amazon, they're doing great. Without Remorse debuted at number 1. And people didn't even like that. It wasn't even that good a movie, but it debuted at number 1. Another huge movie win for the streaming service, which of course, as we discussed, just bought MGM and now owns a number of franchises, including Michael B. Jordan's Creed. Mitchell vs. the Machines debuted at, I don't think the Creed's going to go to streaming, but I think that it will eventually go to streaming after it plays in theaters. It'll go to Amazon. So again, I just think that's interesting, that consolidation. Mitchell's vs. the Machines debuted at number 2. And wow, people are still watching Thunder Force. And it's fourth week. It's still in the top 10. I wonder if Netflix will greenlight a second round of McCarthy and Spencer. By the way, I rewatched Spider-Man yesterday, actually, in fact. It's just been raining all weekend here in New York City. So I watched Spider-Man to get ready for, to refresh my mind so I can catch all the references to the former films. And Octavia Spencer has a small part in Spider-Man, and she nailed it. I had forgotten that she was in that movie, and she was fantastic. Very small part, but she was great. Now, as for this week, Netflix kind of cheated. I can't believe this. And they said that they predict that in 4 weeks, Army of the Dead will make it into their top 10 movies of all time. So it hasn't gotten 72 million views yet. That's a very misleading graphic. They predict that based on how it's doing out of the gate, that in 4 weeks it will reach 72 million, which again just puts it in the top 10. As for this week's Netflix top 10, Army, that dropped to number 4 in its second weekend, while the second half of Lucifer season 5 debuted at number 1. And new animated movie Doggone Trouble, which I never even heard of and came out of nowhere, is at number 2. I watched the trailer. It actually looked pretty cute. Once again, 6 of the top 10 titles are new content, as Netflix, $17 billion this year they're spending on new content, keeps churning out reasons not to click over to any other streaming services. But what does that mean for the content itself? Like, Netflix is keeping you there, but they're constantly, I think, undercutting their content by distracting audiences with something else shiny and new. So how is anything supposed to have longevity? I think it's tough. But it is even more impressive for the shows that do hang on. Now, on iTunes, Wrath of Man popped back up to number 1. Great movie. While fans caught up with A Quiet Place, the first one, which is on sale, as they got ready to watch the second film. Raya and The Last Dragon and Godzilla are also still in the top 10 as sales, still not available for rent. And it's still not yet for free. Raya is going to become free in June, so it's right around the corner for free to watch on Disney+. And Godzilla vs. Kong has been taken off of HBO Max. So if you want to watch those movies, you gotta purchase it on Disney. I don't think can you still purchase it on Disney+? I think you can. Yeah, I think you can. Although why would you? It's going to come there for free in about a week. Or you could purchase it on places like iTunes. As for this coming weekend, The Conjuring 4 hits theaters and HBO Max on Friday. I'll be doing a watch-along on Friday. It'll be my first time watching the film. Let's get scared together. And I have a watch-along tonight at 7 p.m. also for Cruella. I hope that you will join in. And then also, speaking of this coming week, Universal Spirit Untamed will be also only in theaters. That looks like it should so go to digital. And for instance, they just made the announcement that Boss Baby 2 will be one of their rare digital day-and-date releases with Peacock, because they got to get you to go over there on July 2nd. Over on Netflix on Thursday, they have a new Sailor Moon anime film, and then Sweet Tooth drops on Friday. I couldn't review it before the holiday weekend. My schedule just got crazy. But even though the embargo lifted, I will review it early this coming week. It's phenomenal. I loved it. Loved it. Couldn't have loved it more. I just adored it. I think it was just fantastic. So that drops on Friday. I would set a block of time to watch that. And that's this week's Movie Math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? And what do you think of this weekend's box office numbers? What do you think they mean? Share those thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.